There is a kind of person you have probably met at least once in your life. Maybe it was someone in your family, a grandmother who moved through her days with a quiet certainty that seemed almost supernatural. Maybe it was a co-worker who never appeared rattled by the chaos that sent everyone else spiraling into anxiety and short tempers. Maybe it was a mentor, a teacher, a neighbor, or even a stranger you encountered briefly at just the right moment. Someone who said only a few words to you in passing, but whose presence lingered in your memory for years afterward. The way the warmth of afternoon sunlight through a window lingers on your skin long after the sun has moved behind clouds. These people are not easy to describe precisely, but they are impossible to mistake. There is something about being in their company that changes the temperature of a room. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in some slow and unmistakable way. The air feels slightly different. Conversations feel more honest. The things that were weighing on you before you arrived feel not smaller exactly, but more manageable, more proportionate, more like things that belong to a life that is still fundamentally good, rather than evidence that everything is irreparably wrong. These people do not seem immune to hardship. That is the first thing you notice if you look closely. They lose jobs, they grieve, they face illness, disappointment, betrayal, and the slow, grinding weight of ordinary life that accumulates quietly over years. Just like everyone else, they are not insulated from difficulty by wealth or luck or particularly favorable circumstances. Sometimes, in fact, they have faced more than their share, far more than most of us would feel equipped to carry. But there is something about the way they carry it all, something grounded, something deeply rooted, something that seems to draw from a source of nourishment not immediately visible on the surface, that sets them apart in a way that is genuinely difficult to name, but absolutely impossible to ignore. They walk through fire and come out not unburned, but somehow more themselves, somehow more whole, somehow, in ways that defy simple explanation, more fully alive for having passed through it. What is their secret? That is the question at the center of this video, and it is not a small question. It is, in many ways, one of the most important questions a human being can ask, because the answer to it is the difference between a life that is merely endured and a life that is, even in its most difficult passages, genuinely lived. Over the next considerable stretch of time together, we're going to explore something that the self-help industry rarely discusses with real honesty. We are not going to talk about productivity systems or cleverly branded morning routines that promise to transform your life before you have finished your first cup of coffee. We are not going to dress up hustle culture in spiritual language or present Instagram-ready affirmations that sound like enlightenment, but dissolve the moment real life presses hard against them. We are not going to offer you a 10-step program designed to be sold as a course or a workbook or a weekend seminar. We are going to talk about something older, something that predates the self-help industry by roughly 3,000 years. Something that the wisest human traditions, across cultures that never communicated with each other, across centuries that had nothing in common except the shared human experience of being alive, have pointed toward with remarkable consistency. And something that modern neuroscience, positive psychology, trauma research and philosophy are now beginning to confirm in the careful, measured language of data and peer-reviewed research. We are going to talk about spiritual strength, what it actually is, how it is actually built, why it matters more than almost any other quality you can cultivate, and the 8 specific habits that people who possess it consistently practice in their daily lives. Now, before we go any further, I want to take a moment to be very clear about what I mean when I use the phrase spiritual strength. Because this is a term that gets deployed loosely, that means vastly different things to different people, and that can put up walls before we have even begun if we do not address it directly. When I say spiritual strength, I'm not speaking exclusively about religion, though for many people, including many of the people whose lives and practices will inform everything we discuss today, their spiritual life and their religious life are deeply, beautifully, inseparably intertwined. That integration is real, and it is worthy of deep respect. But I am not limiting this conversation to any single tradition or doctrine, because the qualities we are going to discuss are found across traditions and also in people who belong to none. What I am speaking about is something more fundamental, something that might be described as the quality of a person's inner life, the depth and the resilience and the coherence of the interior world that they carry with them through everything that happens to them on the outside. Spiritual strength, as I am using the term, is the quality that allows a person to remain connected to what is most real and most meaningful about their life, even when everything on the surface is breaking apart. It is the inner resource that makes it possible to face loss without being obliterated by it, to hold on to hope when the evidence for hope seems very thin indeed, to live with integrity when compromise would be so much easier and so much more immediately rewarding. To extend genuine compassion, not the performed kind, not the social kind, but the deep, costly, transforming kind, to others and to yourself. To sustain a sense of meaning through the long, dark stretches of life, when nothing seems to be working and the light feels impossibly far away. Spiritual strength, in other words, is not a luxury. It is not something reserved for monks or mystics or people with more unscheduled time than the average person can imagine. It is one of the most practically important qualities a human being can cultivate, and the research on its effects is, at this point, so extensive and so consistent that it cannot responsibly be dismissed. People with robust spiritual lives report significantly lower rates of anxiety and depression. They recover more quickly and more completely from trauma and serious illness. They have measurably stronger immune systems, stronger and more satisfying relationships, and dramatically higher levels of reported life satisfaction across every domain. They find meaning more readily in difficult experiences, which means that difficult experiences become, over time, resources rather than simply wounds. They are more capable of extending genuine compassion, both to others and to themselves, which turns out to be one of the most important predictors of overall psychological health that we have. They live, on average, longer. They age, on average, more gracefully. They die, by most accounts, more peacefully. The question is not whether spiritual strength matters. The evidence that it matters is overwhelming and has been documented exhaustively. The question is, what do spiritually strong people actually do? What are the habits, the daily practices, the recurring patterns of thought and behavior and attention that build this quality of inner life and, crucially, maintain it over a lifetime? What can we observe and learn from the people who have figured this out, whether through deliberate practice or through the hard-won wisdom of having been knocked down enough times to develop a serious relationship with what it takes to get back up? That is exactly what we are going to explore together today. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to do something I genuinely treasure in these videos, and that is to connect with you. Actually connect, not just speak into the void of the internet and hope for the best. If you are willing, would you take just a few seconds right now and drop a comment below telling me where in the world you are watching from? Your city, your country, wherever home is for you today. I ask this every time, and every time the comments fill up with places from all over the globe. The United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, India, the Philippines, Brazil, Jamaica, Germany, New Zealand, and dozens more. And every single time, it genuinely moves me, because there is something quietly extraordinary about the fact that people from such different places, carrying such different stories, shaped by such different cultures and histories and life experiences, can gather together around ideas like these. That shared hunger for depth and meaning, that is something real. That is a kind of community that would have been simply impossible 20 years ago, and I do not take it for granted for a single moment. And if you are watching this and you are not yet subscribed to this channel, please, I am asking you sincerely from the heart, please subscribe. I put an enormous amount of time and thought and genuine care into creating content that actually goes deep. Content that tries to be useful in the way that actually matters, not just interesting or entertaining for a few minutes, but genuinely nourishing. The kind that stays with you and works on you long after the video has ended. If that is something you value, then subscribing is the most meaningful thing you can do to support this work and ensure it continues. It costs you nothing except a click and a second of your time, but it means everything to the ongoing life of this channel. Please do it now, before you forget. The button is right there. I also want to mention something else. There is an option here to become a channel member, and I want to tell you honestly what that means and why it might matter to you. Channel members are the inner community of this channel, the people who have decided not just to watch, but to invest. Members get early access to videos before they go public to the general audience, which means you are always the first to see what is coming. You are the first to engage with new ideas and new conversations. And in being that, you become part of something that genuinely feels like a community, a global gathering of people who care about depth and meaning and the quality of their inner lives. If you have been watching this channel for a while and it has meant something to you, becoming a member is the most direct and personal way to say so, and to ensure that more of what you love keeps coming. The link is below. People from every corner of the earth find their way to these videos. That global reach, that shared human hunger for something real, something deeper than what the surface of culture is usually offering, is one of the most beautiful things I get to witness in this work. So, wherever you are joining from today, whatever season of life you are in, whatever brought you here, welcome. I'm genuinely, sincerely glad you are here. Now, let us go deep together. Habit 1. They practice the discipline of stillness. We live in the loudest civilization in the entire history of the human species. That is not rhetorical excess. That is a measurable, documented, quantifiable fact. The average American adult now spends more than 11 hours per day consuming media of some kind, scrolling through social feeds, watching videos, listening to podcasts, responding to notifications, refreshing news sites, absorbing advertisements, reacting to the endless churn of content that the attention economy has engineered with extraordinary sophistication to be, above all else, impossible to look away from. The average human brain in 2024 processes approximately 5 times more information per day than the average human brain processed in 1986. Not 2 times more, not 3, 5 times more. And it is worth sitting with what that means for a moment, because the human brain has not fundamentally changed in that period. The hardware is the same. Only the input has changed, and it has changed beyond anything our evolutionary history could have prepared us for. We are drenched in stimulation from the moment our eyes open in the morning. The phone within arm's reach, the notifications already accumulated overnight, the podcast already queued, the news already unfolding, to the moment we finally surrender to sleep. And even then, many of us have difficulty sleeping because the nervous system, trained by hours of stimulation to remain on alert, does not easily know how to shift into the quieter mode that genuine rest requires. In the middle of all of this noise, this relentless, engineered, unprecedented noise, spiritually strong people do something that looks, by the standards of contemporary life, almost radical. They get still, not occasionally, when they happen to stumble upon a quiet moment. Not as a result of something else failing, the power going out, the internet going down, the circumstance that forces a pause. They cultivate stillness intentionally, deliberately, consistently, and with the deep, practical understanding that stillness is not simply the absence of something, but the presence of something, something that cannot be perceived, cannot be accessed, cannot be heard or felt or known when the volume of ordinary life is cranked all the way to its maximum. Every major wisdom tradition in human history has pointed toward this truth. Not some of them, not most of them, all of them, in their own language, through their own particular practices, pointing toward the same essential insight. The Hebrew Scriptures contain one of the most quietly powerful passages in all of religious literature. The account of the prophet Elijah, burned out and despairing in the wilderness, encountering the divine presence not in the great wind that tears the mountains apart, not in the earthquake, not in the fire, but in what the King James Bible translates as a still small voice. What the original Hebrew, more literally rendered, describes as the sound of sheer silence, or even the voice of thin silence. The theological meaning could not be clearer. The deepest reality, whatever you understand that to mean in your own spiritual framework, does not shout. It whispers. And if you are not quiet, you will never hear it. The Buddhist tradition places meditation, the disciplined, daily, patient cultivation of inner stillness, not at the periphery of the spiritual path, but at its very center. The entire practice of mindfulness, now widely adopted in secular therapeutic contexts and confirmed by decades of neuroscientific research, has its roots in the Buddhist understanding that the ordinary human mind, left to its own devices, is a chaos of competing thoughts, reactive emotions, and habitual patterns that prevent genuine seeing. The practice of sitting still, watching the breath, and learning to observe the contents of consciousness without being constantly swept away by them is, in the Buddhist framework, the foundational discipline from which all other spiritual development flows. The Christian contemplative tradition, running in an unbroken thread from the Desert Fathers and Mothers of 3rd and 4th century Egypt through the medieval mystics, Meister Eckhart, Julian of Norwich, John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, through the Quakers with their practice of silent waiting worship, through Thomas Merton in the 20th century and the centering prayer movement in the 21st, has consistently, across all its extraordinary diversity of expression, taught the same basic thing, that the soul opens most fully in silence, that the deepest encounter with the divine, however that divine reality is understood, happens not in the spectacular, but in the quiet, not in the dramatic, but in the still. Indigenous traditions around the world, from the vision quest practices of various Native American nations to the deep listening traditions of Aboriginal Australians to the contemplative practices of countless African spiritual traditions, speak of a quality of attentiveness to the natural world and to the deeper dimensions of reality that is only possible when the chatter of the anxious, busy, goal-oriented human mind is quieted enough to receive what is being offered. That these traditions developed independently, across wildly different cultures and centuries with no possibility of direct communication, and yet all converged on the same basic insight. This is not coincidence. This is something more like the convergence of independent research on the same underlying truth. Modern neuroscience has begun to understand why, and the findings are striking. When the brain enters a state of genuine, intentional stillness, whether through meditation, contemplative prayer, sitting in nature with real attentiveness, or any of the other forms that deliberate quieting can take, a cascade of measurable changes occurs. The default mode network, the region of the brain most associated with mind-wandering, rumination, and the relentless self-referential commentary that most of us experience as the ordinary background noise of our mental lives, begins to quiet. The prefrontal cortex, associated with higher-order reasoning, perspective, emotional regulation, and wise decision-making, becomes more active. Cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, drops. Blood pressure decreases. The inflammatory markers associated with chronic stress begin to decline. And something else happens too. Something harder to measure, but consistently reported by people who practice stillness regularly across traditions and cultures and centuries. A sense of perspective returns. The things that felt urgent and overwhelming a few minutes before begin to look different. Not necessarily less real or less serious, but more proportionate. The signal begins to emerge from the noise. The inner compass, which is very difficult to read when you are moving quickly through a landscape of constant stimulation, becomes legible again. Spiritually strong people understand this not as interesting theory, but as lived experience that they have tested and confirmed over time. They know in their bodies as much as in their minds that they cannot access the deepest parts of themselves, their values, their intuition, their genuine sense of what is true and what matters and what the next step forward actually is. When they are running at full speed through the information highway of modern daily life. So they stop, every day when they can manage it. They sit, they breathe. They create a space, however imperfect, however briefly, in which something quieter than the ordinary mind can make itself known. The practice does not need to be elaborate or aesthetically pure. It does not require a meditation cushion, an incense burner, or a silent retreat in a mountain monastery. It can be 15 minutes in the early morning before the rest of the household wakes and the demands of the day fully take hold. It can be a deliberately slow walk taken without earbuds or a phone, with genuine attentiveness to what is actually present. The quality of the light, the sound of the street, the feeling of the earth through the soles of your feet, the sensation of air entering and leaving the lungs. It can be a brief but genuine pause, cultivated several times through the course of an ordinary busy day, in which you simply set aside whatever you are doing, close your eyes, breathe slowly, and allow the relentless forward momentum that the world constantly asks of you to rest for just a moment. What matters is not the form. What matters is the intention and the consistency. Spiritually strong people have discovered, not by reading about it, but by experiencing it day after day, through seasons of dryness as well as seasons of richness, that stillness is not empty. It is, in fact, profoundly full of a kind of nourishment that the ordinary pace and volume of modern life makes almost impossible to receive. A kind of clarity that cannot be manufactured through effort or willpower, but that arrives reliably and repeatedly when the conditions for its arrival are created. And because they have tasted this, because they know from their own experience what stillness offers that nothing else can, they protect it. They guard their quiet with the same seriousness with which they would guard anything genuinely precious and genuinely irreplaceable. There is, of course, a challenge here that cannot be brushed past. In a culture that measures value in output, in productivity, in visible achievement, sitting still and doing nothing that produces a measurable result feels, especially at first, deeply uncomfortable, almost irresponsible. The Protestant work ethic, even in its thoroughly secularized contemporary form, has a very long reach, and it tends to whisper, when you are sitting quietly, that you are wasting time. That you should be doing something, that the inbox is full and the to-do list is long, and the people who are getting ahead right now are the people who are not sitting here with their eyes closed. Spiritually strong people have over time made their peace with this discomfort, not by arguing themselves out of it intellectually. The intellectual argument for making time for stillness is not actually difficult to make, but by discovering, through repeated experience, that the time spent in stillness is not wasted, but is, in a very practical sense, some of the most productive time in their lives. Because the quality of the decisions they make after a period of genuine quiet is measurably better than the quality of the decisions they make on the fly. The quality of their relationships, their work, their attention to the people and things they care about is richer and more genuinely present after they have spent time with genuine silence than after they have simply pushed through from one demand to the next without stopping. The first habit, then, the foundation on which everything else in this list is built, is this: the discipline of stillness. The practice of creating, within the noise and motion and demand of daily life, a space in which the deeper current of your own soul can be felt and known and heard. If you do not currently have such a practice, the invitation here is not to overhaul your entire life or add another obligation to an already overwhelming schedule. The invitation is simply to begin. To find 10 or 15 minutes tomorrow morning before the day has fully claimed you, and to sit, not with your phone, not with a podcast, however excellent the podcast, not with a book, however important the book, but simply with yourself, and with whatever you believe or hope or suspect might be greater than yourself. Sit, breathe, notice, allow. The stillness will feel uncomfortable at first. It almost always does. We are so thoroughly conditioned to stimulation that its absence initially registers as wrongness, something to be fixed, something to be filled. But stay with it, because on the other side of that initial restlessness and discomfort is something ancient and alive, something that has been waiting with extraordinary patience for you to be quiet long enough to receive it. Habit 2. They live with radical intentionality. There is a question that most people never ask, and the absence of this question quietly shapes the entire trajectory of their lives without them ever quite realizing it. The question is, why am I doing this? Not just the large, obvious things, the career choice, the marriage, the city you live in, the religion you belong to or have walked away from, but the small things too, the utterly ordinary things. Why do you reach for your phone within the first 30 seconds of waking up in the morning? Why do you spend your evenings the way you spend your evenings? Why do you say yes when you mean no, and no when you mean yes, and stay silent when something in you is aching to speak? Why do you organize your time and your money and your attention the way you do? Why do you talk about certain subjects the way you do, with that particular combination of conviction and defensiveness, or irony and distance? What exactly are you trying to protect? What are you afraid of losing? What would have to be true about you and your life for the choices you are currently making to be the right ones? These are not comfortable questions. They are the kind of questions that, if taken seriously, have the power to disturb a great deal of carefully constructed comfort. And that is exactly why most people never ask them. Most people, if they are honest, make the choices they make for one of two reasons: habit or expectation. They do what they have always done because it has never occurred to them to examine whether there might be another way of living. Or they do what the people around them expect, the family, the community, the culture, the profession, because the cost of deviation feels too high. The social friction, the disappointment, the anxiety of standing apart from the current, the sheer loneliness of doing something different from what everyone you know is doing, these costs are real, and they are not to be minimized. But spiritually strong people live differently, not because they are contrarians, not because they pride themselves on being difficult or different, not because they are immune to the pull of habit and expectation. They are not. But because they have developed the practice, and it genuinely is a practice, one that must be cultivated deliberately and consistently, especially in its early stages, of asking themselves why, regularly, sincerely, bravely, and being willing to follow where that question leads, even when it leads somewhere uncomfortable. The philosophical tradition has a name for this quality of living, and it is one of the oldest in the Western canon: the examined life. Socrates, in the final speech he gave before the Athenian jury that would condemn him to death, said something that has been repeated so many times over the centuries that it has almost been worn smooth of its original force. He said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Sit with that for a moment, not as a familiar quotation, but as an actual claim about what makes a human life worth living. Socrates was not saying that people who fail to examine their lives are bad people, or less intelligent people, or people of less intrinsic worth. He was saying something much more specific and much more challenging, that a life lived on autopilot, a life in which the choices are made by momentum and social pressure rather than by genuine reflection, in which the days are passed through rather than truly inhabited, is a life that is missing something essential. Something without which all the external markers of success, the achievements, the possessions, the social standing, are, in a very deep sense, hollow. Spiritually strong people have taken this seriously, not just as an interesting intellectual position, but as a practical orientation toward their own lives. They have looked honestly at how they actually spend their time and asked whether the time is being spent in any genuine alignment with what they actually believe matters most. They have examined their relationships and asked, with the kind of honesty that only becomes possible when you are no longer primarily interested in feeling good about yourself, but in being genuinely well, whether those relationships are truly nourishing, truly honest, truly characterized by the mutual care and the willingness for genuine encounter that makes a relationship worth having. Or whether they are simply there because they have always been there, and ending them or changing them would be complicated and uncomfortable. They have looked at their daily habits around rest and nutrition, around how they consume media, around how they spend the first hour and the last hour of their days, and asked whether those habits are building something real in them over time, or quietly draining something real. Not from a place of neurotic self-monitoring, but from the sincere question, is the life I am living actually the life I would choose if I were choosing deliberately? And here is where radical intentionality becomes genuinely radical and genuinely demanding. They are willing to make changes, not dramatic all-at-once overhauls of everything, which rarely work and often produce their own set of problems. But the quiet, consistent, patient, daily work of slowly realigning their choices with their actual values, one decision at a time, saying no to something that has been eating their time and energy and producing nothing that genuinely matters to them, even though saying no is awkward, saying yes to something that their deepest self has been asking for, even though yes involves risk, making the phone call they have been avoiding, having the conversation they have been putting off, choosing the difficult right thing over the easy, comfortable thing, not because difficulty is virtuous in itself, but because they have examined the choice and they genuinely know from the inside which option is in alignment with who they are actually trying to become. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps and went on to develop one of the most important and humane therapeutic approaches of the 20th century, wrote that the last of human freedoms, the freedom that even the most extreme totalitarian power cannot entirely eradicate, is the freedom to choose one's response to any given set of circumstances. That is a profound observation, made by someone who had been placed in circumstances designed with specific intentionality to strip every other freedom away. But Frankl was gesturing at something even larger than attitude. He was gesturing at the fundamental human capacity to choose meaning, To be the author of one's own life, not in the naive sense that imagines we can control what happens to us, but in the deeper sense that we can choose how we respond to what happens, what we make of it, what we decide it means, what we are going to do with it. That authorial quality, that willingness to stand at the center of your own life as the person who is actually making the choices rather than the person to whom choices are simply happening, is what intentionality at its deepest level actually means. Spiritually strong people have discovered something counterintuitive about this practice. It is not exhausting, or rather, it is not the primary source of exhaustion in their lives. Because the exhaustion that most people carry is not primarily the result of working too hard or doing too much. It is, to a significant degree, the result of doing things that feel meaningless, of spending their time, their energy, their attention, their one irreplaceable life on activities and relationships and commitments that are not connected to anything they genuinely care about. This is a particular kind of emptiness, the emptiness of a life lived at the surface, a life in which the motion is constant but the depth is absent, and it produces a tiredness that sleep alone cannot fix. When you begin, even imperfectly, even incrementally, to align your actual daily choices with your actual values, something changes. A different quality of energy becomes available. The work feels different. The days feel different. There is a thread running through them now, something connecting the small ordinary moments to something larger and realer and more genuinely yours. The theologians call it a sense of vocation. The psychologists call it intrinsic motivation, the kind that arises from genuine engagement with something meaningful rather than from the pursuit of external reward. The ordinary person, who has perhaps never heard either of those terms, calls it, when they are lucky enough to feel it, feeling alive. The second habit, then, is this: radical intentionality, the ongoing, courageous, daily practice of asking why, not just once at some significant life crossroads, but as a regular discipline of examined living, and allowing the answers to genuinely shape the texture of your days. Habit 3. They have learned the art of genuine gratitude. I want to be honest about something before we talk about this habit, because I think the honesty matters. Gratitude is one of the most misrepresented topics in the entire landscape of popular self-help and wellness culture. When most people think of gratitude practice, they think of a gratitude journal, a notebook in which you write 3 things you are thankful for each morning before you begin your day. And this is not a bad practice. The research on it is genuinely positive, but the gratitude practiced by spiritually strong people is something so much richer and so much more demanding than a morning journaling exercise that to use the same word for both of them risks misleading people about what genuine gratitude actually involves and what it actually costs. Let me try to describe the real thing. The ordinary, everyday human relationship to experience is essentially and automatically evaluative. Things happen to us, large things and tiny things, dramatic things and utterly mundane things, and our minds, with extraordinary speed and with very little conscious effort required, file each thing into one of 2 basic categories: good or bad, wanted or unwanted, better than expected or worse than expected. This is not a character flaw. It is, in large part, simply how the human brain is designed. The negativity bias, the well-documented tendency of the human mind to give significantly greater psychological weight to negative experiences than to positive ones of equivalent objective magnitude, is a feature of human cognition that almost certainly served our ancestors well. The hominid who was highly attentive to threats, who remembered the location of the predator with much greater clarity than the location of the particularly pleasant resting spot, probably survived longer and reproduced more successfully than the one who paid equal attention to both. Our brains are, in a very real sense, prediction and threat detection machines, and they are especially well designed to identify and respond to the possibility of loss, danger, and disappointment. The problem is that in the contemporary world, where the vast majority of the threats we actually face are not immediate physical dangers requiring rapid fight-or-flight response, but rather chronic social anxieties, financial worries, professional insecurities, and the diffuse ambient stress of a life lived in constant information overload. This hyper-attentiveness to the negative is not protecting us. It is simply making us miserable. We move through our days with brains that are scanning constantly for what is wrong, what is threatening, what is lacking, what is about to go badly. And we find it over and over because the brain is remarkably efficient at finding precisely what it is configured to look for. This is what the psychologists call a confirmation bias in the service of the negativity bias. Not only do we attend more readily to negative information, we actively seek out more of it. Genuine gratitude, the deep kind, the kind that spiritually strong people have spent years cultivating, is the practice of deliberately and consistently interrupting this pattern. Not by pretending that the negative does not exist, not by papering over real pain and real difficulty with forced cheerfulness, or the kind of relentlessly positive thinking that refuses to acknowledge the darkness. But by doing something much more demanding, by training the mind slowly and patiently and through repeated practice to notice what is also good, what is also present, what is also working, what is also in this particular moment of this particular ordinary day, genuinely beautiful and genuinely worthy of attention. Robert Emmons, professor of psychology at the University of California, Davis, and arguably the world's leading scientific researcher on gratitude, has spent decades studying what actually happens, measurably, physiologically, psychologically, to people who practice genuine gratitude consistently over time. His findings are, by any reasonable standard, remarkable. People who engage regularly and sincerely in gratitude practice show measurable and sustained increases in positive emotion, optimism, and general life satisfaction. They show measurable decreases in envy, resentment, and clinical symptoms of depression and anxiety. They report improved sleep quality, stronger immune function, higher energy levels, and, this finding is particularly interesting, a greater and more natural sense of connection both to other people and to something larger than themselves. Gratitude, it turns out, is not simply an emotion. It is a relational orientation. It is the recognition that what is good in your life did not emerge purely from your own effort and genius, that you have received, and that the receiving creates a bond with the sources of what was given. But the spiritually strong people I am describing here have moved beyond even what most of the research typically measures. They have passed through years of practice and the particular kind of schooling that real difficulty provides, from gratitude as a technique to gratitude as a fundamental and stable lens through which they actually see their lives. They have developed something close to what the philosopher Simone Weil called a quality of attention, a capacity to be present to ordinary experience with enough genuine openness and receptivity that the extraordinary within the ordinary becomes genuinely visible. The smell of rain on dry pavement, the way afternoon light falls across a kitchen table, the warmth of a friend's voice on the other end of a phone call, the fact that your lungs are breathing, your heart is beating, the world is spinning, and you are here. I want to be very careful about a potential misreading here because it matters. The gratitude I am describing is not naivete. It is not the spiritual bypass that uses positive thinking to avoid the genuine acknowledgement of real suffering, one's own or others. The spiritually strong people who practice deep gratitude are often among the most clear-eyed, honest, and unflinching observers of reality you will encounter. They are not pretending that the world does not contain profound darkness, real injustice, devastating loss. Many of them have sat inside that darkness themselves, have known grief and illness and failure and betrayal at close range. And it is precisely because they have been in those places and have managed to find their way through them that they understand with an intensity that purely comfortable people often lack the genuine preciousness of what is good and present and alive. The theologian G.K. Chesterton, who was in many ways the opposite of naive, who had looked at the world's darkness and absurdity long and hard and honestly, wrote that the world will never starve for want of wonders, only for want of wonder. That is the exact quality being described here, not the denial of what is hard, but the determined cultivation of the capacity to also see with equal vividness what is beautiful. Not because beauty cancels out pain, but because both are real, and a life that can only see one of them is a life seeing only half of what is actually there. Genuine gratitude, practiced deeply and consistently over time, does something else that the popular conversation around the topic rarely addresses. It begins to dissolve, not completely, not permanently, but genuinely and progressively, the assumption that runs like an underground current through most of consumer culture. The assumption that what you currently have is insufficient, that you are perpetually one acquisition away from real contentment, that the life you are actually living is a rough draft of the life you are supposed to be living, which will begin arriving shortly once the promotion comes through, or the relationship gets repaired, or the children are grown, or the debt is paid, or the health returns, or the circumstances become more favorable. Spiritually strong people have, through consistent practice, begun to free themselves from this assumption. Not perfectly, because none of us are perfect, and the pull of comparison and longing is perennial and powerful, but enough that they experience, with increasing regularity and increasing depth, a quality of inner sufficiency, a genuine sense that what is here, right now, in this body, in this life, with these people, in this particular and unrepeatable moment, is genuinely, extravagantly enough to be grateful for. That experience is, by any honest measure, one of the most liberating things a human being can feel, and it is available, not as a result of better circumstances, but as a result of more deeply practiced attention. The third habit, then, is this: the art of genuine gratitude. Not as a technique to be implemented before breakfast, but as a daily, lifelong practice of attention, of training the eyes of your soul to see, with increasing clarity, wonder, and genuine delight, the gifts that are woven into the ordinary fabric of your life right now. Habit 4. They invest deeply in authentic community. Here is something the ideology of modern individualism does not want to acknowledge, because it undermines a very profitable cultural narrative. You cannot sustain spiritual strength alone. You were not designed to, and the attempt to do so will, over time, cost you more than you can currently imagine. This is not a character weakness. It is not a design flaw in particularly sensitive or dependent personalities. It is a biological and evolutionary reality that applies to every human being who has ever lived, without exception. We are, at the most fundamental level, the level of nervous system architecture, neurochemistry, hormonal signaling, and genetic expression, deeply, profoundly, irreducibly social creatures. Our physiological systems were calibrated over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution in small, tight-knit communities of perhaps 50 to 150 people, where our survival depended not only on our individual capabilities, but on our belonging to a group of people who knew us, who cared whether we lived or died, who would come looking for us if we did not return, who would share food with us when we were hungry and sit with us when we were sick. The epidemic of loneliness that now characterizes the developed world, and it is genuinely an epidemic, formally declared a public health crisis by the US Surgeon General Vivek Murthy in 2023, described in language typically reserved for infectious disease, is not simply an emotional inconvenience experienced by particularly sensitive individuals. It is a physiological emergency affecting millions of people across every demographic. Chronic loneliness activates the same neural pain response systems in the brain as physical injury. It elevates inflammatory markers, raises blood pressure, disrupts the regulation of cortisol, and compromises the quality of sleep. It is associated with dramatically elevated risk of heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, dementia, and premature death. The most frequently cited statistic on this, that chronic loneliness poses health risks comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, continues to be confirmed and, in some studies, surpassed by more recent research. But the spiritual dimension of community, the dimension that the health statistics, as sobering as they are, do not fully capture, is what most concerns us here. The spiritually strong people I am describing have not simply assembled a network of people around themselves and declared the problem of isolation solved. The kind of community that builds and sustains spiritual strength is not a social network in the modern sense, not a collection of acquaintances who perform connection on shared platforms, exchanging curated versions of their lives. It is something much older and much rarer and much more demanding. It is a group of people who actually know each other, who have been present for each other's failures, not just each other's triumphs, who can tell you a hard truth because they love you deeply enough to risk the discomfort that hard truths always involve. Who will sit with you in your grief, genuinely sit with it, not immediately attempt to fix it or explain it away or find its silver lining, because they have made peace with the fact that not everything can be fixed and that sometimes the most important thing is simply not to be alone, who share, at some real and acknowledged level, a commitment to something beyond their own individual comfort and self-interest. Many people find this in religious communities, and the reasons are not hard to see. Religious communities at their best offer something that is genuinely unusual in contemporary secular life, a space in which people gather regularly across genuine differences of age and background and life stage and economic circumstance, around a shared commitment to something they believe is ultimate and authoritative, in which they practice together, through ritual, through shared story, through song, through service, the disciplines that connect the present moment to something much longer and wider than any individual life, in which they hold each other accountable, gently but genuinely, to the values they publicly say they hold, in which the shared acknowledgement of human limitation, the tradition's particular language for the fact that we all fall short, that none of us has it entirely together, that we all need help, creates a kind of radical equality that cuts through the social performance that ordinarily separates people from each other. But religious community is not the only form this takes in the lives of spiritually strong people, and it would be a mistake to suggest otherwise. Deep and sustaining community is found in recovery groups, in activist networks, in neighborhoods where people have made the deliberate choice to actually know each other, in small intentional circles of close friends who have committed together to the difficult and beautiful work of genuine relationship. In all cases, what is shared is not a particular doctrine or practice, but a quality, the quality of realness, of genuine encounter, rather than performance, of a shared agreement, spoken or unspoken, to show up as you actually are rather than as you wish you were, and to extend that same welcome to others. The willingness to be known, which is what is required for genuine community, is, in a culture of performance and curation, one of the most countercultural things a person can do. to allow others to see your uncertainty, your struggle, your doubt, your failure, to let them see not just the parts of you that are admirable and composed and doing well, but the parts that are frightened and confused and not yet figured out. This requires a courage that is easily underestimated, and yet this is precisely what authentic community both requires and makes possible. Because the experience of being genuinely known and genuinely accepted, not despite your complexity and your limitation, but including it, is one of the most healing and most spiritually nourishing experiences available to a human being. It is the experience of being loved not for a performance of yourself, but for yourself. Spiritually strong people invest in this kind of community with the same seriousness and intentionality that they invest in anything else they know to be genuinely important. They prioritize it over other competing claims on their time, including the many demands that feel more urgent but are, in the long run, less crucial. They do the work of showing up, not only when it is convenient and their own life is going well, but especially when it is inconvenient and when someone else is having a hard time. They bring honesty to their relationships, the kind of honesty that trusts the relationship enough to risk it, that says what is actually true rather than what is comfortable or socially smooth. They practice the kind of attentiveness to others that is only possible when you are genuinely interested in who someone is, not just in the role they play in the story of your own life. And they understand something about community that the consumer model of relationship consistently misses. The strength that community generates is not primarily the result of receiving good things from others. It is the result of giving, of being someone who shows up, who listens, who tells the truth, who extends the generosity and patience and genuine care that you yourself most want to receive. There is a spiritual law here that the deepest traditions have always known. What you pour out comes back, in ways and forms you did not expect, multiplied. The person who becomes a genuine community for others discovers, often with great surprise, that genuine community has formed around them. The fourth habit then is this: investing deeply in authentic community, not the performance of connection but the real thing. The patient, sometimes difficult, ultimately irreplaceable work of building and tending relationships that are characterized by genuine mutual knowing, genuine mutual care, and a shared commitment to something larger than any individual's comfort. Habit 5. They practice the discipline of honest self-examination. Of all 8 habits on this list, this one is the most uncomfortable to discuss, the most directly challenging to the spirit of the age, and possibly the most transformative in its long-term effects on the quality of a person's inner life. Honest self-examination. We live, as I mentioned briefly earlier, in a time of extraordinary cultural emphasis on self-affirmation. The message of contemporary wellness culture, of much popular therapy and coaching, of the self-help section of any bookstore, is remarkably consistent. Believe in yourself, love yourself, honor your truth, stand in your power. Your feelings are valid, your needs are legitimate, you deserve to take up space, you do not owe anyone your silence or your smallness. And I want to say clearly, much of this message arrived in response to something real. The therapeutic revolution of the 20th century did genuine and important good. It helped enormous numbers of people break free from the crippling, often religiously reinforced self-contempt, the sense of being fundamentally damaged, fundamentally unworthy, fundamentally too much or not enough, that had been woven into Western cultural life for centuries. The permission to love yourself, to take your own experience seriously, to acknowledge that your needs are not impositions on the world. These permissions were genuinely liberating for millions of people, and their liberation was, in many cases, long overdue. But somewhere along the way, something went wrong. Self-affirmation quietly became self-exemption. The permission to be kind to yourself which is genuinely important, genuinely healing, genuinely needed, became, in the wider cultural adoption, the permission to avoid examining yourself. The idea that you should love yourself began to imply for many people that you should never question yourself, never challenge yourself, never sit with serious discomfort about the gap between the person you actually are and the person your stated values call you to be. The result is a curious spiritual impasse. A culture that talks constantly about growth and authenticity, but that has created powerful cultural antibodies against the one thing that makes genuine growth possible. The willingness to look honestly at yourself, acknowledge where you have fallen short, and do the work of change. Spiritually strong people have not fallen into this trap. They practice with a consistency that can look quite demanding from the outside, the discipline of honest self-examination. They are willing to look at themselves clearly, to see, without turning away, where they have been less than they aspire to be, where they have caused harm, where they have been cowardly when integrity required courage, dishonest when honesty was called for, selfish when generosity was possible, or unkind when their own discomfort was simply not good enough justification for unkindness. And they do something about what they see. Every major wisdom tradition has built specific practices around this discipline, which tells you something important about how fundamental it is considered to be. In Judaism, the practice of cheshbon hanefesh, literally translated as an accounting of the soul, involves the regular, systematic, honest examination of one's moral life. Not a vague general sense of, I try to be good, but a specific practice-based accounting of particular behaviors and patterns. How did I actually treat the people around me today? Where did I say what I believed when I would rather have stayed silent and safe? Where did I stay silent when speaking was what integrity required? The tradition takes this practice seriously enough that the period between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the 10 days of repentance, is structured around it, and the entire community enters it together. In Christianity, the examination of conscience has a tradition running from the Desert Fathers of Egypt through the Jesuits, whose founder Ignatius of Loyola made the daily exam a structured practice of reviewing the day's experience in the presence of God, noticing where consolation and desolation arose, and asking for the grace to do better, one of the central disciplines of the Jesuit order. The practice is not primarily about self-condemnation. Ignatius was emphatic that the examination was a practice of love and of growth, not of punitive self-assessment, but it required, as its most basic precondition, the willingness to actually look. In Buddhism, the practice of mindfulness includes a dimension of honest attention to one's own mental patterns, the arising of greed, aversion, and delusion in their countless subtle forms. That is not about judging these patterns, but about seeing them clearly. The Insight tradition teaches that we cannot transform what we cannot clearly see, and that the first step in loosening the grip of unhealthy habitual patterns is precisely to bring them into the full, clear light of non-judgmental attention. The word that the Christian tradition uses most often for this broader process of discernment, of distinguishing between what is genuinely of God or of one's highest self, and what is the product of fear, ego, defensiveness, or self-deception, is itself instructive. Discernment requires discrimination, and discrimination requires seeing clearly, and seeing clearly requires the courage to look at what is actually there rather than what you would prefer to see. This is genuinely difficult, and the difficulty deserves honest acknowledgement. The human capacity for self-deception is one of the most comprehensively documented phenomena in all of psychology. We are extraordinarily skilled, often without any conscious intention, at constructing internally coherent narratives in which we are the protagonist who is doing their best under difficult circumstances, and the people who have frustrated or hurt or failed us are the ones at fault. We remember our intentions with great clarity and forget our impacts with remarkable convenience. We notice other people's failures readily and rationalize our own with extraordinary creativity. We tell ourselves stories about our motives that are flattering and comfortable and that we genuinely believe, and that are also, in ways we cannot see from inside them, significantly incomplete. Honest self-examination requires a double move that is both psychologically and spiritually demanding. First, the willingness to see what is actually there, without flinching, without immediately constructing a defense or a justification or an explanation that restores your comfort and self-image. Second, the refusal to be crushed by what you see, because both failures, the failure to look and the failure to maintain your self-worth in the face of what you see, undermine the practice. The person who cannot look honestly is not growing. The person who looks honestly but collapses into self-contempt every time they see something that falls short is not growing either. They are simply switching one form of dishonesty for another. The dishonesty of excessive self-condemnation in place of the dishonesty of excessive self-justification. The sweet spot, the place where genuine growth is possible, is what the best contemplative traditions call humility. Not the performed smallness that says, "I'm terrible, I'm nothing, please do not hold any expectations of me." Not the weaponized modesty that preemptively disqualifies itself to avoid the risk of genuine engagement. But genuine humility, the settled confidence that you are a person of real worth and real capacity, and also that you fall short in specific, identifiable, changeable ways, and that you are willing to do the honest work of actually changing those ways. It is the combination, the equal and simultaneous holding of your own worth and your own limitation, that makes genuine examination possible without it becoming either denial or destruction. Spiritually strong people have discovered that honest self-examination, painful as it sometimes is in the short term, is one of the deepest sources of their inner freedom. Because the things we refuse to look at do not go away when we refuse to look at them. They go underground. They accumulate, slowly and invisibly, forming what the Jungian tradition calls the shadow, the unacknowledged, unexamined aspects of ourselves that eventually find expression in ways we did not choose and cannot always understand. The anxiety that has no obvious cause, the disproportionate reaction to a small provocation, the pattern of behavior that keeps repeating in your relationships no matter how many times you have promised yourself it would be different this time. The willingness to look clearly in love, without flinching and without condemning, is what allows genuine change to happen. It is what makes repair and apology possible when you have caused harm. It is what builds, over time, the quality the ancient Greeks called integrity in its deepest sense. Not simply honesty toward others, but the state of being undivided within yourself, of having no shadowy gap between the public self and the private reality, between who you say you are and who you actually are when no one else is looking. The fifth habit, then, is this: the discipline of honest self-examination, the regular, sincere, courageous practice of looking at yourself clearly, not to punish yourself, but to know yourself, and through knowing yourself, to become slowly and imperfectly and unstoppably more fully who you were made to be. Habit 6. They have made peace with impermanence. Somewhere very close to the heart of most human suffering, if you trace the suffering back far enough, through the anxiety and the resentment and the grief and the fear, all the way to its root, you will find a single stubborn refusal, a refusal to accept that things end, that people leave, that circumstances change beyond your ability to control them, that the chapter of your life you love most will eventually close, that the person you cannot imagine living without will one day be gone, that the body you rely on will age and slow and ultimately fail, that nothing you have, nothing you have built, nothing you are, is exempt from the universal law of transience. This is not a new problem. The Buddha identified it 2,500 years ago in the first of the three marks of existence as the primary and universal source of human suffering, and gave it the name anicca, impermanence, and the response to anicca, another name, upadana, which translates roughly as clinging or grasping. We suffer, the Buddha taught, not primarily because things change and end, though that is genuinely painful, but because we refuse to accept that they do. Because we grip. Because we try to hold still what will not hold still, to secure what cannot be secured, to guarantee what was never available to be guaranteed. The Stoic philosophers of ancient Greece and Rome built an entire philosophical practice around what they called the contemplation of impermanence. The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher who wrote for himself rather than for publication, and whose private journals have survived 2 millennia, are saturated with this practice. The repeated, deliberate, honest acknowledgement of the transience of everything he valued, his empire, his power, his relationships, his own life. Not to become cold or detached, but precisely for the opposite reason. Because the Stoics understood that full appreciation is only possible in the presence of acknowledged impermanence. That what we know will not last, we tend to love more truly and attend to more fully while it is here. The Japanese aesthetic tradition offers perhaps the most exquisite cultural articulation of this insight. The concept of mono no aware, roughly translated as the pathos or tenderness of things, is a pervasive sensibility in Japanese culture and art, a bittersweet, luminous awareness of the transience of all beautiful things, and a quality of tender attention to beauty that arises specifically from the knowledge of its impending end. The cherry blossom, one of Japan's most beloved cultural symbols, is celebrated with such extraordinary intensity precisely because it falls so quickly, the blossoms lasting only 1 or 2 weeks before the wind takes them. Remove the impermanence, and you remove much of the intensity of the love. Spiritually strong people have done what is often the most difficult and costly work of their spiritual lives. They have made genuine peace with impermanence. Not by becoming emotionally detached or philosophically nihilistic, not by telling themselves that nothing matters because nothing lasts, which is the counterfeit peace of despair wearing the costume of wisdom, but by doing the opposite of that, by learning, through years of practice and through the particular and irreplaceable schooling of real loss, to hold what they love lightly enough, open-handedly enough, to love it fully. There is a paradox here that deserves to be stated plainly, because it is one of the most practically important truths in the entire spiritual landscape. The people who grip most tightly, who are most desperate to control outcomes, most resistant to change, most terrified of what they might lose, are in actual practice the least able to fully enjoy what they have. Because the grip itself is exhausting, and the anxiety of holding on is always quietly present in the background of every apparently good moment, tinged with the knowledge of what it would mean if the thing being gripped so tightly were to slip away. The attempt to secure what cannot be secured ends up consuming the very experience it was meant to protect. The people who have genuinely made peace with impermanence, who have done the inner work of opening their hands, are, paradoxically, often the most fully present and the most genuinely joyful people you will encounter. Not because their lives are free of loss, Often they have lost deeply and significantly, but because they are not spending their energy on the futile project of holding back time. They are spending their energy on being actually here, in this moment, with this person, in this season, which is unrepeatable and which is asking for nothing more and nothing less than their full presence. Making peace with impermanence is not accomplished once. It is a practice that is revisited many times, often when life forces the revisitation through loss that was not chosen and could not be prevented. The death of a parent, which closes a chapter of your own identity, your identity as someone who has living parents, that can never be reopened. The end of a marriage or of a friendship so deep it felt permanent. The diagnosis that divides your life into before and after. The slow discovery that the body you trusted is no longer entirely reliable. The gradual recognition that a season you loved, a season of particular energy or freedom or closeness, is over, and that wishing it back will not bring it back. These experiences are teachers. Difficult, costly, irreplaceable teachers. And the people who can genuinely receive their teaching, rather than simply white-knuckling through them or being numbed by them, or being hardened by them in ways that close down rather than open up, emerge from them with a quality of wisdom and tenderness and real presence that is very hard to come by any other way. The sixth habit, then, is this: making peace with impermanence. The deep, ongoing, sometimes agonizing practice of accepting the transient nature of all things, and discovering in that acceptance not resignation, but a richer, more luminous, more fully present engagement with the extraordinary gift of your one particular life. Habit 7. They serve something larger than themselves. There is a well-known psychological study from the 1970s that has stayed in the research literature for decades because its implications are, if you actually sit with them, quite extraordinary. The setting was a nursing home. Residents were divided into two groups. Both groups were given a houseplant. One group was told that the staff would water and care for their plant. They did not need to do anything. The other group was told that the plant was theirs to care for, that its survival and health depended on the attention and care they gave it. The plant needed them. After 18 months, the results were striking enough that the researchers published them with the kind of language you usually only see when the data is unusually clear. The residents who had been given responsibility for caring for their plant were significantly more alert, significantly more active and engaged with their environment, and significantly healthier by every measure available. And their mortality rate, the rate at which they were dying, was significantly lower than that of the group who had no plant to care for. A houseplant, that is all. The simple fact of having something outside yourself, something small and green and eminently replaceable, something that most people would not consider meaningful in any serious sense, to care for, something that needed you, something that gave your daily life a small but genuine purpose beyond the management of your own comfort and survival. This was enough to measurably change the trajectory of people's health and longevity. Viktor Frankl, whose observations in the concentration camps of Auschwitz and Dachau constitute one of the most important bodies of thought on meaning and human resilience that the 20th century produced, arrived at a very similar conclusion through a very different path. In circumstances designed with explicit intentionality to strip away every ordinary basis for meaning, identity, community, profession, family, freedom, dignity, Frankl observed that the people who survived, not just physically but psychologically, with their humanity intact and their inner life not destroyed, were almost invariably people who had found something to live for, not in the abstract, not as a philosophical position, but concretely, a specific person they needed to return to. A specific work they believed the world needed them to finish, a specific future they held in their imagination with such vividness and such conviction that the present horror, real as it was, could not entirely extinguish it. People who had lost the sense of any larger purpose, who had arrived at the place where they could see no reason, no call, nothing that required their continued presence, often gave up, Frankl observed. Sometimes very quickly, even when they were physically capable of surviving, as though, having found nothing to live for, they were no longer entirely sure that survival itself was worth the cost it was demanding. Frankl formalized these observations in his therapeutic approach, which he called logotherapy, from the Greek logos, meaning word or meaning, and the central proposition of which is that the primary motivational drive in human beings is not, as Freud argued, the drive for pleasure, and not, as Adler argued, the drive for power, but the drive for meaning, for a sense of purpose, for the felt conviction that one's existence contributes to something beyond itself. This proposition has been exhaustively studied in the decades since Frankl's work, and the findings are extraordinarily consistent. People who have a clear and felt sense of purpose, a sense that they belong to and contribute to something they believe is larger and more important than their own individual well-being, live longer, recover more quickly from illness, are more resilient in the face of adversity and setback, and report significantly higher levels of every dimension of well-being that the research measures. The relationship between purpose and flourishing is not modest. It is one of the strongest relationships in all of the empirical literature on human well-being, and yet the culture in which most of us live and breathe is, in very significant ways, working actively against the development of genuine purpose. Consumer culture, with its relentless emphasis on personal comfort, individual fulfillment, and the optimization of your own experience, frames the goal of human life, implicitly and pervasively, as the maximization of your own positive experience. It tells you, in every advertisement and every cultural signal, that the point is to feel good as much as possible, to accumulate the things and experiences that will make you feel good, and to minimize or remove whatever makes you feel less good. It frames your life primarily as a project of self-care and self-fulfillment, in which other people and causes are relevant primarily to the degree that they contribute to or detract from the quality of your personal experience. This is not just spiritually shallow. It is, the evidence suggests, a reliable recipe for a particular and pervasive form of misery. The misery of a life that is entirely about you, and that therefore depends entirely on your own circumstances being favorable in order for you to have any sense of meaning or satisfaction. A life without genuine commitment to anything beyond your personal comfort is a life that is, inevitably, small. And that smallness, that self-enclosure, produces a quiet but persistent suffering that no amount of self-care, however sincerely practiced, can fully address. Because what is actually missing is not better self-care. What is missing is the experience of being genuinely needed by something outside yourself. Spiritually strong people have found their way to something larger. For many, this takes the form of explicit religious vocation, a sense rooted in their particular tradition's understanding of divine call and human purpose, that their specific life and specific gifts are needed for specific work in the world. For others, it takes the form of justice commitment, a burning, sustaining sense that the specific suffering or injustice they have encountered, whether in their own life or in the lives of others, is something they are called to address, and that their particular skills and energies are most fully themselves when they are being directed towards something that matters beyond their own comfort. For others, it is a deep commitment to their family and community, a sense that the primary and most important work of their life is to love specific people well, to transmit something genuinely valuable to the next generation. to contribute to the ongoing story of a community or a tradition or a neighborhood they care about and believe is worth caring about. The specific form genuinely varies, and that variety is not a problem. What is consistent across all of these forms is the quality, the orientation of the self towards something beyond the self. The willingness to stand before their own life and say, there are people whose flourishing I am willing to sacrifice for. There is a work I believe in enough to give my effort to, and my time, and sometimes my comfort. There is something I am living for that will continue after I am gone. This kind of commitment is, paradoxically, one of the most powerful and most reliable sources of genuine inner freedom. Because when you know what you are for, when you have found the thing or the people that call out your best and most particular self, a great many decisions become clearer and less agonizing. You know what to say yes to and what to say no to. You know how you want to spend your time. You know who you are. And that knowledge, that settled sense of being oriented towards something real, is, perhaps more than any other single quality, the bedrock on which genuine spiritual strength is built and sustained through everything. The seventh habit, then, is this: serving something larger than yourself. The ongoing, sometimes demanding, always sustaining practice of orienting your life towards something, a person, a community, a cause, a calling, that you believe in enough to sacrifice for, that you love enough to be changed by, that is large enough to give your one particular life the shape and the meaning that your own personal satisfaction alone never could. Habit 8. They return, always return, to forgiveness. We come now to the last habit on this list, and in many ways the most challenging, the most costly, the most counterintuitive, and, for all of those reasons, the most transformative. Forgiveness. I want to be precise about what I am and am not talking about, because this word carries more misunderstanding than perhaps any other in the spiritual vocabulary. I'm not talking about the thin social version of forgiveness, the "it's fine, don't worry about it," that functions as a social lubricant in situations where someone has done something mildly inconvenient and you genuinely do not mind very much. That is courtesy, and it has its place, but it requires nothing of us and produces nothing particularly significant. I am talking about the real thing, the kind that is required when someone has genuinely, seriously hurt you. When the trust has been genuinely broken, when the harm has been real and lasting, when the person who hurt you has never apologized, may never apologize, and may not even understand that they caused harm, or may understand perfectly and simply not care. I'm talking about the kind of forgiveness that is asked of you in situations where every human instinct is screaming that you are absolutely entitled to your resentment, that the anger is completely justified, that any decent person in your position would feel exactly as you do, and that releasing it would be a kind of capitulation, a surrender of your own dignity, a pretense that what happened was acceptable, a betrayal of the part of yourself that was hurt. That is the forgiveness we are talking about, and the reason every major wisdom tradition places it at the very center of spiritual life, the reason it is not presented as optional or as the province of exceptional people, but as a practice that all serious spiritual seekers must engage with, is not because it is easy, it is because it is essential. And because the alternative, the holding of grievance, the nursing of wounds, the long maintenance of resentment, costs us, in the end, everything the tradition promises us we can have. Let me say something very clearly about what forgiveness is not, because the misunderstandings on this point are real, and they prevent real people from beginning the practice. Forgiveness is not saying that what happened was acceptable. It is not pretending that the harm was not real. It is not excusing the person who hurt you from the consequences of their actions. It is not approving of what they did, or suggesting that it was understandable, or letting them off the hook. It is not reconciliation. This is perhaps the most important clarification of all, because many people resist forgiveness precisely because they believe it requires them to restore a relationship with someone who has demonstrated that they are unsafe, harmful, or genuinely malicious. And that is simply not what forgiveness means. Forgiveness can be given completely and genuinely to someone who will never receive it. It can be extended toward the dead, toward the absent, toward people who remain dangerous and from whom you must remain protected. You can forgive someone fully and still never see them again, never speak to them again, never allow them back into your life or the lives of people you love. What forgiveness actually is, at its deepest, most honest level, is the refusal to allow your injury to become your identity. It is the decision to stop rehearsing the story of your wound as the most important story about your life. It is the choice, made once and then again, often for months or years or decades, to say, what was done to me was real, and it was wrong, and it hurt me in ways that were serious and lasting. And it does not get to define who I am. It does not get to determine the quality of my future. I am not my wounds. I am more than what was done to me, and I choose, as an act of will and of love for my own life and my own future, to be free of it. The field of psychoneuroimmunology, which studies the relationship between psychological states and physical health, has now documented with considerable precision what the mystics and the wisdom traditions intuited long before the science was available to confirm it. Chronic resentment and unforgiveness are, at the level of the body's stress response systems, a form of ongoing self-harm. They elevate cortisol and blood pressure over extended periods in ways that over time produce measurable damage to cardiovascular function. They suppress immune activity in ways that compromise the body's ability to resist illness. They disrupt the quality of sleep, which disrupts almost everything else. They are associated with significantly elevated rates of anxiety, clinical depression, and a range of inflammatory conditions that are linked to chronic psychological stress. The person who wronged you, in the vast majority of cases, is not lying awake each night, being consumed by suffering at what they did to you. You are the one who is lying awake. You are the one in whom the wound is kept fresh and infected by each re-rehearsal of the injury. Every time you return to the story of how you were wronged, every time you run it through your mind again, inhabiting the anger and the sense of violation again, reinforcing the neural pathways that were laid down by the original injury, you are not being hurt again by the person who hurt you. You are re-injuring yourself. You are doing to yourself, willingly and repeatedly, something quite close to what they did to you unwillingly, and perhaps only once. The image that gets attributed to various sources, that holding resentment is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die, is not merely a clever aphorism. It is, with genuine precision, an accurate description of the physiological reality. Forgiveness is the decision to stop drinking the poison, not because you owe it to the person who hurt you, not because they deserve it, not because releasing it is a moral requirement that you must fulfill in order to be a good person, but because you deserve to be free, because your life, the whole entire irreplaceable life that you have been given, is too precious. Your capacity for joy and love and growth is too genuinely extraordinary to be held permanently hostage to what someone else did. Because the future that is available to you is far better than the future available to someone who has organized a significant portion of their inner life around the tending and protection of a grievance, however justified the grievance may be. The theologian and forgiveness scholar Lewis Smedes, whose book Forgive and Forget is one of the most honest and practically useful things ever written on this subject, wrote that forgiving is the only way to heal the wounds of a past we cannot change. He was careful to distinguish it from forgetting, which is not something the mind can choose to do. He was careful to distinguish it from excusing, which pretends the harm was not real. He was careful to note that it does not automatically produce reconciliation with the person who caused the harm. What it does, Smedes argued, is something more intimate and more radical. It changes the way you feel about the person who hurt you. Not necessarily to warmth, not necessarily to anything resembling friendship, but to a kind of release, a loosening of the grip that their actions have had on your inner life that gradually opens up a different quality of present. Spiritually strong people have not achieved perfect, instantaneous, effortless forgiveness. No honest tradition, no credible teacher, and no thoughtful human being who has worked seriously with this practice would claim that it works that way. They know from experience that forgiveness is often not a single decision, but a direction you choose, and then choose again, and then choose again, sometimes for years. That there will be mornings when you wake up and the resentment is back, as sharp as it ever was, as though all the work of the past months has been undone overnight. And that on those mornings, the practice is simply to choose the direction again. Not perfectly, not with complete emotional compliance, but with the settled, deliberate, faithful will to go that way rather than the other. Over time, slowly, unevenly, with setbacks and with seasons of what feels like backward progress, the grip loosens. The old story begins to lose some of its compulsive hold. The wound does not disappear, but it scars over in a way that no longer requires constant tending. And something new, something genuinely different, becomes available in its place, a kind of spaciousness, a quality of interior freedom that people who have not done this work often find difficult to believe is real until they have experienced it themselves. The eighth and final habit then is this: returning, always returning to forgiveness. Not as a performance of virtue, not as a capitulation, not as the pretense that harm was not harm, but as one of the most courageous and most genuinely powerful acts available to a human being. The ongoing, faithful, demanding, ultimately liberating choice to live forward, rather than being held perpetually in place by a past that, however real it was, however serious the harm, should no longer have that kind of dominion over the extraordinary and irreplaceable gift of your present and your future. Bringing it all together, the architecture of an integrated spiritual life. We have now explored in some depth and with real seriousness 8 habits, 8 specific, practiced, cultivatable disciplines that characterize the inner lives of people who are, by any honest and comprehensive measure, genuinely spiritually strong. Let us gather them together now, because they are not a checklist of independent strategies. They are 8 dimensions of a single integrated life, a life in which each practice supports, deepens, and makes possible the others, and in which the whole is, in the end, significantly greater than the sum of its parts. The discipline of stillness is the foundation. It is the soil in which everything else grows. Without genuine, regular, practiced stillness, the other habits are likely to remain theoretical, things you believe in and aspire to, but do not actually embody, because you have never created the inner space in which the deep parts of yourself can be heard and known. The person who is never quiet can live for decades in a continuous forward motion that covers enormous ground without ever going deep. Stillness is what makes depth possible. Radical intentionality gives direction to the energy that stillness opens up. When you can hear yourself, When the noise is quiet enough for the deeper voice to be audible, you face the question of what to do with what you hear. Intentionality is the practice of actually doing it, of taking the values you discover in quiet and genuinely instantiating them in the texture of your days, in how you spend your time, how you manage your attention, what you say yes to, and what you say no to. Genuine gratitude keeps the whole project from becoming grim and driven. This is more important than it might initially sound. There is a particular kind of spiritual seriousness that becomes, over time, joyless. A relentless self-improvement project in which the bar is always slightly higher than where you are. The next level of growth, always just out of reach. The present moment, always insufficient by comparison to the future self you are trying to become. Genuine gratitude is the antidote to this. It is what returns you again and again to the recognition that the life you are currently living, imperfect, incomplete, and in process as it is already, in many ways, extraordinary. That there is beauty here right now that deserves your full and unhurried appreciation. Authentic community provides the relational ground in which everything else is tested and sustained. The insights you discover in stillness, the values you align yourself with through intentionality, the perspective you cultivate through gratitude, the honest self-knowledge you develop through examination. All of these are deepened, challenged, refined, and ultimately made real through genuine relationship with people who actually know you. You cannot test your values in isolation. You cannot develop your capacity for love in isolation. You cannot discover your blind spots in isolation. Community is where the interior work becomes visible, becomes accountable, and becomes most fully formed. Honest self-examination ensures that your spiritual life has genuine substance rather than merely spiritual aesthetics. It is what prevents the gap between who you say you are and who you actually are, from slowly widening into something that corrupts everything it touches. It keeps the work honest. It keeps you in contact with reality, which is, in the end, the only place where genuine growth can happen. Making peace with impermanence frees you from the anxious, exhausting, ultimately futile project of trying to hold everything still. And in that freedom allows a much richer and much more genuinely present quality of engagement with your life to become possible. The person who is willing to hold life with open hands is available to it in a way that the person who is gripping cannot be. Serving something larger than yourself provides the overarching sense of purpose that gives shape and meaning to the entire enterprise. It is what transforms a collection of spiritual practices into a life that is going somewhere, that is contributing something, that is about something larger and more enduring than your own personal experience. It is, in many traditions, the clearest indicator of genuine spiritual maturity, not how much peace you feel in meditation, but what you are living for. And forgiveness, returned to faithfully over and over through every season of wound and grievance that a full human life will inevitably bring, dissolves the calcified resentments and old injuries that, if left unaddressed, will quietly undermine every other practice. Unforgiveness is, in the spiritual life, like a slow leak. It does not destroy things all at once, but over time it drains everything. And the ongoing brave practice of choosing release, choosing freedom over the grim satisfaction of held grievance, clears the ground for something genuinely new and genuinely alive to grow. These 8 habits practiced together over time create something that the spiritual traditions across cultures and centuries have pointed toward in their own particular languages, what the Hebrews called shalom, a word that means not simply the absence of conflict, but a condition of deep wholeness, integration, and flourishing. What the Greeks called eudaimonia, sometimes translated as happiness, but more accurately rendered as the flourishing of the deepest human capacities. What the Christian mystical tradition called the peace that passes understanding, not the peace of comfortable circumstances or untroubled days, but the peace of a person who is deeply rooted in something that neither difficulty nor change can uproot. This kind of inner life is available. That is the conviction at the center of this video, and I hold it not as wishful thinking, but as a conclusion drawn from the evidence. The evidence of the wisdom traditions, the evidence of the contemporary research, and the evidence of the lives of real people who have actually built it. It takes time, it takes honesty, it takes the willingness to do things that the culture does not always reward, or sometimes actively discourages. But it is available. It is real. And the people who have found their way to it are not a different species from you. They are people who, somewhere along the way, decided to take their inner life seriously, and who have been practicing, imperfectly and persistently, ever since. The long game, why spiritual strength builds over time. Everything we have discussed today operates on a timescale that modern culture has very little patience for. We live in an era of rapid feedback loops, instant results, and the expectation that if something is genuinely valuable, it ought to be producible quickly. The idea that the most important things take decades, that the kind of inner depth we have been describing is built slowly, through years, and sometimes through experiences that you would not have chosen, is deeply countercultural. And it is also deeply true. Consider what actually happens to a person who begins to practice stillness at the age of 30 and continues the practice through all the interruptions and seasons and changes that a life contains, into their 40s, 50s, 60s and beyond. What that person has access to at 60, the quality of inner quiet, the depth of self-knowledge, the practice capacity for genuine presence, is not simply more of what they had at 30. It is qualitatively different. The practice has not simply accumulated, it has transformed. It has changed the architecture of the practitioner's inner life in ways that are real and lasting, and that show up not only in their spiritual experiences, but in their relationships, their decision-making, their capacity to be genuinely helpful to others, their ability to face difficulty without being dismantled by it. This is true of every one of the 8 habits. They are all, at their core, long-game practices. They build compound interest. The gratitude you practice sincerely today, even if it feels small and incomplete and half-hearted, is adding to a growing capacity that will serve you significantly better in 5 years than it is serving you now. The forgiveness you choose today, imperfectly, with the resentment still partly present, without complete emotional freedom, is laying a neural and spiritual groundwork that the forgiveness 5 years from now will build upon. The community you invest in today, the relationships you tend and deepen and refuse to let atrophy, are becoming something richer and more sustaining with every year that passes. There is enormous encouragement in this, if you are willing to receive it. Because it means that the work you are doing right now, even if it does not feel like much, even if your stillness practice is scattered and your intentionality is uneven and your gratitude journal has more blank pages than full ones, is genuinely going somewhere. It is building something real, not quickly and not visibly, but with the slow and inexorable power of deep roots growing in quiet soil. The people who inspired this video, the ones who move through their lives with that quality of groundedness and grace that first prompted the question, what is their secret, did not arrive where they are overnight. They arrived through years of practice, through seasons of dryness as well as seasons of richness, through failures that became instruction and losses that became teachers and ordinary unremarkable days that added quietly and cumulatively to something that now looks, from the outside, almost like a gift they were simply born with. They were not. What they were born with is what you were born with, the capacity, The rest is practice. The rest is the daily, faithful, imperfect, and ultimately extraordinary choice to take your inner life seriously, to show up for the quiet, to tell yourself the truth, to invest in the people around you, to serve something beyond yourself, to keep choosing forgiveness even when the grievance rises again, and to trust that the work is going somewhere even when the destination is not yet visible. What do you do next? Practical first steps. There is a gap. One of the most consequential gaps in the whole landscape of self-development, between what people learn and what they actually practice, between the insight that genuinely moves them in the moment and the behavior change that would make the insight real in their lives. Enormous numbers of people have read the right books, watched the right videos, attended the right workshops, and emerged genuinely inspired and genuinely moved, and then returned to their ordinary lives and changed essentially nothing. Not because they were cynical or uncommitted, but because inspiration without specific, concrete, immediate action steps tends to dissipate within 48 hours, leaving only a pleasant memory and the vague sense that you should probably do something about all of this at some point. So let me offer you something specific, not a comprehensive program, not a 10-week course, but a genuine first step, an action that is small enough to actually take, clear enough to know when you have taken it, and meaningful enough to begin the shift. Of the 8 habits we have explored today, stillness, intentionality, gratitude, community, self-examination, accepting impermanence, serving something larger, and forgiveness, I want you to sit with one question before you close this video. Not a rhetorical question, a real one. The question is, which of these 8 represents the greatest growth opportunity in your life right now? Where, if you are honest with yourself, is the most ground available? Where is the place that, if you genuinely engaged it, would make the greatest difference to the quality of your inner life and your relationships and your sense of living meaningfully? For most people, the honest answer to that question is not actually very hard to identify. We usually know. We often just need permission to know it and the space to sit with it without immediately defending ourselves. Whatever it is, start there. Not by designing an elaborate new life, but by identifying one specific, small, daily practice that would represent genuine engagement with that habit. For stillness, 15 minutes of genuine quiet tomorrow morning before checking your phone. For intentionality, sitting down this evening and writing honestly and specifically 3 ways in which the life you are currently living diverges from the life your deepest values would call you toward, and choosing one of them to begin addressing. For gratitude, writing down before sleep tonight, not just what you are grateful for, but why. What specifically about that thing or person or experience deserves genuine appreciation, described in full and specific sentences rather than a quick bullet point. For community, sending a message this week to someone in your life who represents genuine connection and making a specific plan to spend time with them. For self-examination, taking 20 minutes this evening to sit quietly and ask yourself honestly and without defensiveness one question: where, this past week, did my actual behavior fall short of the person I want to be? And what is one specific thing I am going to do differently? For forgiveness, I am not going to suggest a small first step because there is none that would be honest. The invitation with forgiveness is simply to begin, to say, as a real and genuine act of will rather than a performance, some version of the words that every tradition's forgiveness practice eventually arrives at. I want to be free of this. I do not yet know how to let it go completely, but I am choosing today to take one step in that direction, and to trust that the next step will become clear when it does. That is enough. That, genuinely, is more than enough. Because one step taken seriously leads to another, and another, and another. And slowly, over the months and the years and the seasons that follow, something builds, something real and deep and yours. A final word about courage. There is a quality of courage required by the spiritual life that is almost never talked about in the popular conversation around these topics, because it is not the kind of courage that makes for good stories. We talk about courage in the context of the dramatic, the soldier in battle, the whistleblower who risks everything to tell the truth publicly, the person who stands up in a moment of visible crisis and does the right thing at great personal cost. That is genuine courage, and the world rightly honors it. But there is another kind of courage that is less visible and in many ways more continuously demanding. The courage to show up day after ordinary day for the unglamorous, unwitnessed, unremarked work of tending your own inner life. The courage to be still when every habit in you is screaming to keep moving. The courage to examine yourself honestly when self-justification would be so much more comfortable and so much more immediately relieving. The courage to choose forgiveness again on the morning when you have woken up in the grip of old resentment that you thought you had finished with. The courage to invest in community when the last time you opened up to people, they hurt you, and the walls feel so much safer than the openness. The courage to serve something larger than yourself when the culture is telling you, in every direction you look, that the only important project is the maximization of your own experience. None of this is dramatic. None of it will be written about. No one will give you an award for the morning you got up and sat quietly for 15 minutes before beginning your day, or the evening you sat down and told yourself the truth about where you had fallen short this week, or the moment you chose, again, to release the grievance rather than tend it. But this is the courage that builds the life, the actual, deep, genuinely inhabited life that we have been describing throughout this video. It is the courage that the wisest and most fully alive people you have ever known have been practicing, quietly and consistently for years, and it is courage that is available to you, starting today, starting right now, exactly where you are. You are not the person you were 10 years ago. That is not a small thing to recognize. It means that the person you will be 10 years from now is genuinely, substantially different from who you are today. The only question, the only real question, is in what direction that difference will go. And that direction is, more than any external circumstance, more than any stroke of luck or twist of fate, determined by the choices you make in the ordinary, unremarkable, endlessly precious dailiness of your one particular life. What we have explored today is a map. Not a perfect map, and not the only map. There are other traditions, other teachers, other languages for pointing toward these truths, and they are all worthy of exploration. But a genuine map, drawn from some of the deepest wells of human wisdom and confirmed by the best of contemporary human understanding. A map that points imperfectly but truly towards something real. The territory is yours to walk. However you found your way to this video today, whatever series of searches or recommendations or moments of longing brought you here, I believe that arrival was not accidental. I believe that the hunger that brought you here is itself a form of wisdom, that the part of you that wanted to understand how to be more spiritually strong, more deeply rooted, more genuinely alive, that part of you is right. It is pointing towards something real, and it is worth following. Go gently. Go honestly. Go with the deep and settled confidence that the work you are doing on your inner life matters, not just for you, but for everyone whose life touches yours, for the people you love and who love you, for the community you are part of, for the world that is, in ways both visible and invisible, shaped by the quality of the people it contains. That work ripples outward, in ways you will never fully see or measure, in ways that outlast your life. In ways that are genuinely and without exaggeration, part of what is most hopeful and most beautiful about the ongoing human story. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for all of it, for your attention, for your time, for the seriousness with which you showed up today. Now go and begin. Before you go, I want to ask you for a few things, and I want to ask for them sincerely, not as a scripted outro, but because they genuinely matter to the life of this channel and to the community that this channel is building. If this video meant something to you today, if any part of what we explored together resonated or challenged you or gave you something real to sit with and carry forward, please subscribe to this channel right now if you have not already done so. I want to ask you earnestly, please hit that button. I pour a great deal of thought, care, and genuine effort into creating content that actually goes deep. Content that respects the real hunger people bring to these questions and tries to meet it honestly, rather than offering something clever and shallow that feels satisfying for a moment and then dissolves. Subscribing costs you nothing. It takes 1 second. And it ensures that you will be here for everything that is coming, which I promise you is worth being here for. Please also like this video if you found value in it. I know it can feel like a small gesture, but it genuinely is not. The like tells the algorithm, that mysterious and powerful and largely opaque system that determines what content reaches which people, that this is something worth surfacing. That there are people who are looking for exactly this kind of depth and seriousness, and that this channel is one of the places they can find it. Every like is a small act of advocacy on behalf of this kind of content, and in aggregate, those small acts make an enormous difference. Turn on notifications so that when the next video drops, you will know immediately. The content coming to this channel in the weeks and months ahead is going to go even deeper into the questions we began exploring today, about how to live with genuine depth and genuine integrity, about how to face what is most difficult with grace and with honesty, about how to build the kind of inner life that can sustain you through everything that a fully lived life inevitably brings. You will not want to find out about it 3 weeks late. And please share this video. Think right now of one specific person in your life, not a generic someone might like this, but one specific named real person, a friend who is going through something difficult, a family member you know is searching for something deeper, someone you love who seems to be losing their spiritual footing. Someone who would recognize themselves in something we talked about today. Send them this video, a text message, a WhatsApp, an email with just 2 lines. Watch this and thought of you. Think it's worth your time? You have no idea, you genuinely cannot know what that small act of care might mean to them or where it might lead. And please leave a comment. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me which of these 8 habits hit you hardest. Tell me which one you are going to begin practicing and how. The comment section of this channel is one of the most genuinely thoughtful and genuinely caring communities I have encountered anywhere on the internet, and every comment adds to it. Every person who shows up and says something real contributes to a space where the real conversation can happen. There is so much more to come, so much more depth to go to, so many more questions worth taking seriously, so much more of the territory that we began mapping today left to explore. The journey is long and it is good, and I am profoundly grateful to be traveling it with you. Until the next video, wherever you are in the world, whatever season you are in, whatever you are carrying today, may you know that you are not alone, that the hunger for depth and meaning that brought you here is shared by more people than you can see, that the work you are doing on your inner life is real and it matters and it is going somewhere. and that the life you are living, with all its imperfection and all its beauty, is genuinely, extravagantly worth living with everything you have. Be well, be brave, be gentle with yourself, and above all, be genuinely, fully, irreplaceably yourself. God bless you, wherever in the world you are watching from. We will see you